Okay, so once you have the right cymbal and the subdivision, the triplet subdivisions, as well as the feathering of the bass drum and the good 2 and 4 and the hi-hat going on well in all tempos and all dynamic levels, the next thing to do is to work on the accompaniment that your left hand, or right hand if you're a left-handed drummer, the hand that's going to play on the snare drum makes an accompaniment of the basic time feel and creates a response to the other instruments in the ensemble, the soloist, the piano player or guitar player. The hand that's on the snare drum, playing on the snare drum, is really your musical hand. It's the one that punctuates different things in the music, phrases, accents, responds to instruments, answers certain phrases from the soloists, gives a certain rhythmical information that hopefully the other players will react to. It kind of gives an overall completion to the orchestration of the music that you're playing. Unlike pop or rock music, where mostly the snare drum is playing the very important backbeats that punctuate the time and gives the sort of the propelling feeling of the rhythm, in jazz the snare drum hand is much more free to be a part of the orchestration of the entire music. So it's very important to develop that, and while most of your time should go to listening to how great jazz drummers play with their snare drum hand and what kind of things they play and how these things respond and correspond to the other instruments in the ensemble, there's a couple of exercises you can do to coordinate your left hand with your right cymbal and your feet. And these exercises are usually referred to syncopation exercises. So you have a few wonderful books. One of them is Ted Reed's Syncopation. There's also a book by John Riley that deals with ready-made jazz phrases transcribed from records that also include syncopation. There's also Jim Chapin's second book, Advanced Coordination for the Modern Drummer, Part 2, that also deals with a lot of written syncopated text. And basically what that is pages and pages of different combinations, syncopated combinations of eighth notes, and those eighth notes can be swung and turned into triplets. This is what, of course, a lot of drummers and arrangers in jazz music will do. They will write down eighth notes on the page, but the musicians would interpret them as triplets. So if you get that text, that written text, you have to basically try to read it with your left hand while keeping as an ostinato your right cymbal pattern and your feet with bass drum feathering, quarter notes, and hi-hat on 2 and 4. This is of course the beginning level. You can go much further, but it's very important to start with that. So in the next example I take a page from Ted Reed's Syncopation book and I read it with my left hand on the snare while I'm keeping the right cymbal and the feet going. Of course, you can go much further and play the syncopated line with your bass drum while keeping the right cymbal and the hi-hat, and let's say a click or a rim shot on 2 and 4 with your left hand. You can also read the text with your hi-hat, which will involve even a more advanced syncopation and coordination. And for example, another great method you can use is take all the short notes or the eighth notes of the text and play them with your left hand on the snare, and take all the longer values like quarter notes and dotted quarters and half notes and play them with your bass drum. So this will create a sort of a long, short kind of combination, which a lot of bebop drummers used to do, and also big band drummers. A lot of the times they would interpret short hits with their snare and longer hits with their bass drum. So this will get you closer to the actual application of this in the jazz drumming language. Another thing you can do is, again, shown to me by the great Ralph Peterson, and he got it from the great jazz drummer and jazz educator from Boston, Alan Dawson, who wrote a very, very great book that you should all have. And the first part of the book deals with the rudiments and the rudimentary ritual, combining all the rudiments in a very big exercise. And the second part deals with different types of syncopation and coordinated independence, where you can also see many, many ways to interpret the same text with your limbs and different combinations. So one of those methods is, for example, looking at those eighth note combinations, but seeing them as triplets. In other words, feeling the triplets the same way we were talking about putting the entire triplet into the subdivision while you're practicing your right cymbal. You can fill in the triplet while playing the written eighth note text, and then you're getting close to the Elvin Jones drum language, where he used to fill up a lot more the triplets, the whole triplet subdivisions with his snare drum and bass drum. So that gets you even closer to the actual application of these things, and doesn't remain an exercise. And it's a general thing when you practice jazz drumming and any kind of drumming in general. If you want to be more musical and more close to the actual situations where you'll be playing music with people, try to avoid exercises and doing exercises for the sake of exercise. Always think about the application that these things would have in the music. And these particular exercises, like the syncopation methods, are actually very close to the actual musical situation, because they coordinate your limbs, so when you play you don't have to think about where your hands and feet go. Also, it really improves your reading and improves your time, because when you have to deal with all that coordination, you will have you'll get a very solid time feel. You'll be confident in each limb playing good time. So this is one of the examples where these are not exactly exercises, but they're really methods to get you further in your abilities to play the jazz drums. Another approach, other than reading complete pages of syncopation and practicing syncopation while maintaining your right cymbal and feet, is to actually get small phrases, isolate them, and practice those for coordination. It's a method that John Riley is a great jazz drummer and educated from the US, suggests in his books. He took out small phrases from 1 or 2 bar phrases from actual jazz records, and great drummers playing on those jazz records, and he believes in practicing those phrases alone, then combining them in different ways, and this way you're actually using actual jazz phrasing other than reading exercises. You're right away really thrown into the idea of improvising phrases, ready phrases, and having them in your vocabulary. This is also a great method, and I think you should work on both. And they develop different kind of things of your musical imagination. So here's an example of that kind of practicing syncopation. After you've acquired a great deal of these syncopation methods and your limbs are working very well, you have a good coordination, you read effortlessly through the texts, and you have all different ways of interpreting the syncopation with your limbs, you have to start improvising those lines, because in an actual musical situation, the great jazz drummers would play phrases corresponding to what's happening around them in the music, to the soloist, to the other accompanying instruments, to the tunes and the arrangements. So they have this coordination together, so they don't have to think about their right cymbal and their feet or their hi-hat or whatnot, but they are really focused on what they're actually expressing with the snare drum and the bass drum, all 4 limbs sometimes, in correspondence with the music. So first you get to that level of going through the exercises and thinking about them as exercises, and then you're starting to improvise. So that's very important step. And don't forget that finishing and going through all the syncopation methods is not going to make you a great jazz drummer. One of the most important things, and never overlook that, is listening. You have to constantly be listening to how great jazz drummers accompany, what they play, because this is the only way how you will know what to use when. The exercises are not going to give you that. So give a great amount of time devoted to listening to records, listening closely to all the great drummers, what they do, and in relationship to the other instruments and the music. Don't listen to the drums alone, because you might become familiar with a lot of phrases, but if you cannot connect those phrases to the context where they're applied at, you've been wasting your time, and it's very likely that you'll be overdoing or overusing this kind of things just to show that you can do them. And how many times have I seen, especially young drummers who have a lot of the coordination together and they play really nice phrases between their limbs, and when they go to a jam session or they play with a band, they're constantly just busy playing some stuff with their snare and bass drum, which doesn't have anything to do with what the soloists are doing and what the other people in the band are doing. And since you're an accompanying instrument, this is not a very good decision to make. So what you want to do is relate all of that stuff to what you're hearing around you in the bandstand. So with that in mind, now we work on these improvisational ideas coming out from records, coming out from actual content of what drummers that you hear are playing, and improvise those things. Another great thing to do, which I don't remember who told me that, but it was just a very, very valuable lesson, was to think about how the big band arrangements are built, where there's a lot of question and answer going on between the different sections of the big band, trumpets, trombones, and saxophones, and how your bass drum and snare drum can function as let's say your snare can be the trumpets and your bass drum can be the trombones or the saxophones, and how these phrases all of a sudden become very musical, because you're actually thinking about a big band arrangement. You can really build your accompaniment without thinking about just rhythm, but thinking about phrase. So instead of just going pap to do do you can really think about a musical phrase and imagine, and of course you have to listen to a lot of big bands to know that language, but you can really think about pap pap boom boom do ba beep beep ba do 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 da ba 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 boom boom ba ba boom boom ba doom ba doom doom ba ba. All this kind of very cool arrangement that the big bands over the years have accumulated as a repertoire, you can use as a great reference to practice these kind of musical ideas without getting stuck and without thinking as an exercise. So here's an example of that.